Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 634. I had black pieces. My opponent played e4, and I went with the Sicilian defense, c5, and I decided to go with the con Sicilian. So that starts with e6, and he goes the main line, open Sicilian, e4, d4, and I take it. C takes d4, he takes back, and then I play a6, and that's the idea with the con Sicilian. You control these light squares so the knights can't hop into those squares. And then after knight c3, you play queen to c7. So kind of funny setup, but it has its points. The queen is looking out on the dark squares here, and particularly it controls e5 for the moment, so the knight can come to f6 with no trouble. And the fact that these squares are under control means that this knight is not hopping in here to harass the queen. And the queen is often well placed on c7 in these Sicilian structures. So looking out at the king side and also looking at the queen side, maybe with future pressure on the c file. So a bit of an unusual early queen development, but not bad. And now my opponent plays the main move here. Let's take a look at the opening book. Yeah, bishop d3 is the top choice in this position. And people who are not familiar with this might find this a funny move, but bishop d3, the reason it's not played so often in Sicilians is this knight here is now loose. And if I'd been playing a different line, my knight would already be sitting on c6, and his knight would be under pressure, and this bishop d3 move would not be possible. But because the way I've played with the con Sicilian, this bishop d3 move is possible, and this is a good diagonal for the bishop. This pawn is not fixed that pawn is not fixed. It can move forward, and the bishop can open up. That diagonal can open up for the bishop, and the bishop can participate in the king side attack. And in the meantime, it's just defending that pawn. So a good move. Let's see, knight f6. He castles, and I go d6. So looking at the opening book again, actually the top choice here was bishop c5, but I didn't like that line so much. I went bishop c5. Bishop c5, you're hitting the loose knight there, so you kind of gain a tempo. But knight b3 and then bishop back to e7. I don't know if white has gained a whole lot. There's a move that's not in the opening book but looked interesting to me, which is bishop to b4, putting a little pressure on this knight. And if he defends with bishop d2, which looks like a natural move, the computer was also suggesting he could have played queen to e1 there. Kind of a funny move. But bishop d2, at least this bishop is tied up and it's not coming out to harass this knight for the moment. So that seems useful, and it gets this bishop outside the pawn chain. So the way I played it, if we look at the opening book again, I went with d6, which is the third choice. I could also just go knight c6 and challenge his knight with my knight. And after d6, yeah, he plays bishop g5, and we're just out of the opening book here. But nothing, has gone horribly wrong. This is all okay, a position which is about even. He goes king h1, preparing to push his f-pawn forward, and I go b5. Typical expansion on the queen side in the Sicilian, and maybe in some cases I'll push on to b4, kick this knight away, grab the pawn there. And he went f4. And right here I actually make a fatal mistake, which seemed like I thought about this position for quite a while during the game and played what seemed like a natural developing move, knight to c6. And that pretty much gives white a winning advantage at that point. So I guess one of the things about playing a new opening like the I'm experimenting with the con. It's not one of my regular openings, but I've been trying to add it to my repertoire. And so you're sometimes not attuned to all the tactical nuances in the opening as you start to play it. It takes a few games before they all kind of sink in. So there's problems along the light square diagonal. We'll see that in the game. So one move to play here to consider is just bishop b7. This does, as I mentioned, it takes a piece off of the e6 square, but there's no sacrifice on e6 that's working at the moment. White really needs the coordination of the bishop and the knight, the light squared bishop and the knight on e6 before that's an effective tactic. So there's time to play bishop b7, and that would stop all these problems that I had in the game right there. Another move I could play here is just castling, and that would also be fine. But knight c6 is just a losing move, and he exploits this great perfectly. He takes the knight. I take back, and now if you just look at the geometry here, there's obviously a weakness along this light squared diagonal here, and he immediately opens that diagonal up for his bishop by playing e5, and it's a move that comes with tempo, and so now there's this threat of bishop to e4, skewering my queen, picking up the rook in the corner, and there's also the threat on the knight. I tried knight g8. There are other tries here. Knight d5 is maybe the most natural looking move, but after bishop to e4 anyway, pinning that knight, it's really difficult to this is a difficult position for black to get out of, actually. There's a big threat of just knight takes d5, and then this knight has a move with check that wins the queen, and yeah, it's big trouble here. So rook to a7 is the chess engine suggestion, getting the rook off of that diagonal so that maybe you can kind of slowly unwind. And then after this exchange, taking the knight. And like I said, now there's this threat of knight to f6 check, winning the queen, so this has to be taken. And now bishop takes d5. And well, in this line at least, white didn't win a piece. He didn't win the exchange. So I was able to get my rook out of trouble and my queen out of trouble. But he won a pawn, I think. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. So yeah, he's a pawn up here. And I've got to move my queen so he can stay a pawn up. And my position looks like a disaster too, whereas white is fine. So he has the pawn and the compensation, and so that's probably winning for white. The chess engine at this point gives the best move is bishop to b7, playing bishop to b7 anyway. I guess not fearing the immediate bishop to e4, because you can play d5 to shut down that diagonal with the tempo on the bishop. But it does leave the knight hanging, but it's got a mate threat. That's the idea. So white has to pause, defend against the mate threat. Queen to e2 rather, and then now knight to d5, blocking this diagonal. Then once again we get this exchange. I can take back with the knight, and then there's another tactic. Knight takes b5. So there's problems everywhere. If I take back, of course, bishop takes is the skewer of the queen and the king. So, and all these problems go back to that knight to c6 move. So anyway, that was those were the good lines. Those were the best lines for black. I tried knight to g8, and let's see, he just exchanged here. I took back. He took the pawn on d6, and now I can't take. Once again, tactics. The bishop takes this pawn with check, and my queen is loose on d6, and it would just fall. So that that pawn is protected by the threat. So knight d5, I was thinking maybe I'm kind of wriggling out of my problems here. Maybe I can grab that pawn next, now that the line from the queen to the pawn is shielded, and the check there won't gain anything. But he takes this knight off, and now I take with the e pawn, and that loses. I have one more chance to continue the game here. Let's see. Oh, by the way, yeah, knight takes d5 was not his best move. He could have played bishop to e4, and that's how white keeps the biggest advantage here. I can grab the pawn, then he can take the knight. I take back, and bishop takes d5, and I move the rook. And once again, it's a position where white is a pawn up and has the better placement of the pieces. I still haven't castled. And so white is better developed and with an extra pawn, so probably winning. So knight d5 actually, well, white still has the advantage here, even with best play. But it turns out I can take with the queen, and the difference here is after queen takes, the pawn is defending my queen, so my queen isn't sitting here loose anymore. So these ideas of bishop here check don't gain material. But still, this pawn is still off limits, the d6 pawn. I still can't take that. But he has to find some other ideas. The engine is suggesting rook e1 here to prepare bishop to e4, skewering the queen and the rook going to b8, and then a4, trying to weaken up the pawns. On the queen side, white does stay a pawn up here, but maybe my position is a little better than what we saw in some of the other lines. That would be my best chance, but white's still better. Anyway, after knight takes d5, I was still leery of putting my queen on that file, but as we saw, it was actually safe in this case. Anyway, I took with the e-pawn, and this opens up a whole nother range of problems, which is he can now check along the e-file. That's what I did when I grabbed the knight. I opened up the e-file, and then I blocked with the bishop, which is giving a piece away, but nothing is good here. If I move the king, then I won't ever castle, and this pawn is coming forward with a pretty big threat as well. So anyway, it's all losing here, but bishop e6 was definitely not the best move because it walks right into f5, and I'm just down a piece. So that we can just step through the rest of the game. He maybe had a few ways to win quicker, but he always stayed a piece up and just continued the game on to the end game, and he's got a winning end game here with the rook and the bishop against the rook, and he's just going to round up my pawns if we count at the moment. Yeah, I did manage to get a pawn back, but I am down a piece in the end game. So easy win for white from here, and I resign. But, well, an interesting game, and it's useful if you... very instructive, I think, if you want to play the Con Sicilian, to watch out for those tactics along the light squared diagonals there. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.